Hello and welcome to Plus Pramesh e-Library. Here we are again with a very interesting news that has been going around in the global world. And what is it? It is about the new groupings that are indicating to be formed in the near future. So UK recently spoke about forming a group called as D10 or Democracy 10. At the same time, when a G7 summit, the G7 groupings summit was supposed to be held in US because US was to be hosting the summit this year. Basically, it got postponed because of the COVID-19 crisis. But having said that, it could have happened digitally. But it was postponed to September because it was felt that instead of having it digitally, it's better to have basically all the members, all the leaders of the nations involved and have a physical meeting. And it was postponed to September. But the news is not just there. News is Mr. Donald Trump, who is the President of United States of America, went on to say that G7 represents an outdated group of countries and there is a need to include more members. For example, he proposed a grouping called as G10 or G11, and this actually outraged something called as EU or European Union, because G10 did not have Russia but G11 did. And to which EU replied and said that Mr. Donald Trump cannot actually change the G7 format. And this all created a controversy about what is G7, what is G10, what is G11 and what is D10. So here I am, Supriya Singhal, presenting to you this particular video so that all your queries regarding G7, G10, G11 and D10 are basically done away once for all. So first let's start about G7. What is this G7? So G7, as you can mention, it's basically grouping 7. So grouping of 7 countries. And these 7 countries came together in 1973 when there was a massive oil crisis that took place. This oil crisis led the most economic and developed countries of that time to come together so that they can formulate some policies for a better political and economic global world. So who are these first 7 countries? But no, you are wrong. Why? Because it was not 7 countries that came together first. It was actually 6 countries who came together in 1973. And who were those? It was basically USA, then Germany, then France, then UK, Japan and one more. Which is that one more? So that one more country was basically Italy. So as you can see, the G6 grouping that we are talking about right now in 1973 has one country from the North America region, then one country from the Asian region, which is Japan, and the remaining 4 are from basically European Union, or you can call it as Europe. So now we have 6 countries. Then how did it become G7? It became G7 in 1976 when Canada joined the grouping. So now it was called as G7, a grouping of 7 most developed countries. Now these countries are not only developed and not only industrialized, but they have certain other things also in common. And what was it? Basically, these are the countries which have largest gold reserves. These are also the countries which contribute maximum to United Nations budget. These are also the countries which have per capita income or per capita GDP more than $12,000 and basically making them high income countries. And these are also the countries which are basically, you can say, very rich, very developed and very industrialized. Now, having said that, this G7 grouping was formed and the first summit of this G7 grouping took place in France. So in these summits, it was not like that only G7 countries were invited. There were other international organizations also which were regularly invited. For example, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Trade Organization, African Union, International Energy Agency and United Nations. Apart from that, any country, if they wanted to invite another country outside the G7 members, they could invite them as guests, but not as members. So now the picture is basically till 1976, it is G7 country. Now it is a G7 grouping. Then comes the year 1991 and here basically starts the USSR dissolution, right? So Soviet Union is no longer a Soviet Union and then we have basically formation of Russia. So after 1991 and the Berlin Wall has been dissolved and basically there is no USSR or Soviet as such, we have Russia now. So what happens is in 1998 then Russia joins this grouping and G7 becomes G8. So now it is basically G8. But then comes a time in 2014, and this G8 is again going to become G7. And what happened in 2014 was that Russia annexed Crimea from the Ukrainian Peninsula region. So now what will happen? Obviously G8 countries or G7 grouping, the other 7 members of this G8 grouping will not agree to Russia's action, and they will obviously impose sanctions, etc. But that is a separate story. Apart from that, to show Russia that they do not support its action, they actually expel Russia out of this G7 or G8 grouping, which now converted back to G7. So G7 and G8 is the same grouping, it is expanding and then it is contracting again. So this is the story of G7 and G8. But then why is it in news right now? It is in news because what happened was that Mr. Donald Trump, whose presidency is to host the current G7 annual summit, which is supposed to be happening in US this year, has actually said that he wants to expand the membership of the G7 and wants to create a grouping which is actually G10 or G11. So now who will be there in G10? So G10 will have all these 7 members of G7. Who are these? USA, Canada from North America region, Japan from the Asian region, and then 4 countries of Europe. Who are these? UK, France, Germany and Italy. So these are 7 members plus 3 other members. And who are these 3 other members? So they will be India, Australia and South Korea. So this is the G10 grouping. And then who will be there in G11? It will be G10 plus Russia. So basically, Mr. Donald Trump has been saying that we need to have a grouping which is much more representative of current world scenario, and therefore we need to have a grouping something called as G10 or G11. In both of these groupings, G10 or G11, there will be India's participation. So don't you think that India's stature in the world is rising? Might be or might be not. But it is definitely true that the handling of the situation of COVID-19 by the Indian Prime Minister and the Indian government has been applauded even by WHO. And China, on the other hand, has actually faced a lot of criticism regarding its handling of the COVID-19 crisis, which has led to the infection spreading so far that more than 70 lakh people in the world are actually infected today. And most of them being in US, Italy, France, etc. So this grouping G10 or G11 is basically a grouping of the democratic countries, but to the few analysts they are saying it can be a grouping which can be anti-China also. But there has been no confirmed report so far, so we cannot go and extrapolate the efforts and say it is an anti-China grouping. No, it is not as of now. It is just a proposed grouping which is basically to ensure there is better coordination between G7 plus other members who are definitely rising in stature. So this was all about G7, G10 and G11. But then we come to the next point, which is D10. What is this D10? So D10 is actually Democracy 10, and this is also a grouping proposed by UK, not by USA. So this grouping has a much more narrower agenda than what we can call as G10 or G11. And what is it? This D10 grouping is basically supposed to be like a 5G club. Okay, so you must have known that recently the 5G technology by the Chinese company Huawei has been facing a lot of criticism, specifically in the Western world. And why is it so? Because it is assumed that the data privacy laws, the bugs, the malpractices are very, very common in this Huawei technology, and they might not be following the you can say the global guidelines around the digital world that have been established. So USA has been very prominently actually going around and telling other countries also to not let Huawei establish the 5G infrastructure in their country. So now tell me, when the telecom revolution is happening, 5G has already come in place. So if the countries who do not have money, who do not have such telecom companies which can on their own establish their 5G infrastructure, then how will they actually survive this telecom revolution? Because they need to be going with the world order, which is around the 5G. So that's when this D10 grouping was proposed by UK. It said that D10 will have G7 members plus 3 other members, which is basically Australia, South Korea and India. And these T10 or basically the Democracy 10 countries are those countries which will be coordinating, which will be trading in the 5G related infrastructure, both hardware and software. And in this way, we don't have to worry about the Chinese companies like Huawei, and we can definitely take the infrastructure from other companies. And who are the other companies providing 5G infrastructure? They are only two, Nokia and Ericsson. So in this way, they're actually proposing that we have a better group wherein all 5G related infrastructure trade can happen without concerns of privacy or malpractices or bugs. So this was D10, which was proposed by UK, and then there is G10 or G11 proposed by USA. But these two groupings as of now have not been materialized and they are on paper, but we will keep you updated as and when they get materialized. With this, we end the video. Thank you.